Welcome to the Healthy Living RTN, your trusted space for simple, science-backed tips to live healthier, happier, and longer. Here, we explore nutrition, lifestyle habits, and wellness insights that help you take control of your health, one step at a time. If you're ready to feel better, eat smarter, and live your best life, you're in the right place. Let's get started. 1. Background. What the U.S. dietary guidelines are and why they matter. The U.S. Dietary Guidelines for Americans, DGA, are updated every 5 years by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture, USDA, to provide science-based advice on nutrition and healthy eating for people ages 2 and older. These guidelines influence federal nutrition programs, school lunches, WIC SNAP, senior meals, healthcare and public health advice, food policy and procurement decisions nationwide. They have been published since 1980 and are arguably the most influential national nutrition recommendations in the United States. The guidelines historically shaped dietary messaging, such as promoting low-fat diets and high carbohydrate intake, and have long been blamed by critics for contributing to obesity and chronic diseases. That history sets the stage for heated debates over the most recent revision. 2. What the new dietary guidelines quietly admit they were wrong article claims. The article, which originates from a health blog advocacy site and is tied to Dr. Eric Berg, a chiropractor and social media health educator, frames the new dietary guidelines as a dramatic reversal of decades of misguided policy. A. Core argument. They admit they were wrong. The piece asserts that the updated guidelines implicitly acknowledge past mistakes by dramatically changing the visual food pyramid and advice. Key points from the article include: 1. Inverted food pyramid. The old food pyramid with whole grains as its foundation is replaced by an inverted pyramid that places greater emphasis on protein and reduces carbohydrate prominence. 2. Ultra-processed foods targeted. It claims the new guidelines explicitly target ultra-processed foods as major drivers of chronic disease and move beyond the old focus on calories and low fat. 3. Greater protein recommendation. The article says the new recommendations increase daily protein to approximately 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight, significantly higher than older, minimal recommendations 0.8 grams per kilogram. 4. Downplaying old messages. According to the piece, the guidelines quietly move away from dogmas like low saturated fat, low cholesterol, and high grain consumption, allegedly admitting these were wrong. 5. Biological definition of food. The article points out that the guidelines are working toward a biological definition of food, focusing on what sustains life and nourishes tissue, and anything else would not be true food. 6. Missing elements. It also claims the updated advice still fails to address root drivers of chronic disease, like insulin resistance and eating frequency. This summary forms the basis of the Article S thesis that the federal government has quietly admitted dietary policy failures that harm health. 3. Clarifying what actually changed in the new dietary guidelines. To evaluate the article's claims, it's essential to look at independent reporting on the real changes in the official dietary guidelines, including mainstream sources such as Reuters, Stat News, and nutrition professionals. A. Official themes in the new guidelines. While the government has not publicly released a finalized version as of January 2026, credible reporting and draft releases show the following broad themes: increased focus on whole, nutrient-dense food. The updated guidelines emphasize whole foods over refined grains and ultra-processed foods, signaling a shift in emphasis from previous editions. Protein and healthy fats gain importance. Officials have publicly stated that protein and healthy fats are essential and had previously been underemphasized in older guidelines. This includes moving away from strict low-fat recommendations and acknowledging the role of saturated fats in broader dietary patterns. Critique of past messaging. The health secretary involved in the latest revision explicitly criticized earlier guidelines for protecting corporate interests and overselling the benefits of certain processed carbohydrates. New emphasis on ultra-processed foods. Prior guidelines did not specifically recommend reducing ultra-processed food intake, while the emerging guidance does, reflecting modern scientific consensus that such foods are linked to chronic diseases. 4. Comparing the article's claims with the official direction. Now, let's examine the article's key arguments in light of what independent sources report. 1. They were wrong about whole grains and carbs. Article claims old guidelines pushed 6 to 11 servings of grains day. New guidelines invert that pyramid, reducing carbohydrate emphasis. Reality. Draft guidance emphasizes whole grains and fiber, but also calls for a reduction in refined grains and added sugars. Some advocates on social media note the inverted pyramid visuals are confusing and potentially inconsistent with text recommendations as well. Analysis. There is a departure from previous advice that broadly endorsed grains, but the guidelines still value grains in the context of whole nutrient-dense foods. It's not a simple reversal, but a nuanced refinement supported by current evidence about refined carbs and added sugars. 2. The government now targets ultra-processed foods. Article claims new guidelines identify ultra-processed foods as the primary driver of chronic disease. Reality. Independent reporting confirms the new guidelines are expected to more directly address processed foods and caution against them. Analysis. This claim aligns with mainstream scientific and public health discourse. There's growing evidence linking ultra-processed foods with obesity, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease, and the new guidance reflects this shift. It's more accurate to say officials now acknowledge risks more clearly than that the government has admitted past errors. 3. More protein, especially animal-based, is now recommended. Article claims the article promotes a sizable increase in recommended protein and animal-based protein. Reality. The official guidance does increase emphasis on protein, but broader public health reporting notes it doesn't exclusively favor animal sources and still recognizes plant proteins. Analysis: protein recommendations have evolved, but the extent and type animal versus plant are more complex in the official text than the article suggests. Independent nutrition experts argue that a balanced approach, including plant sources, remains evidence-based. 4. They admit chronic disease roots like insulin resistance still missing. The article faults the guidelines for not addressing eating frequency or insulin spikes. Reality: official guidelines focus on overall dietary patterns, food groups, nutrient distribution, and avoid prescribing specific metabolic strategies like insulin timing or fasting. Analysis: this criticism reflects ideological disagreement with how dietary guidance should approach chronic disease. It's not an admission of error, but a difference in scope. Guidelines are population-level recommendations, not individualized metabolic therapies. Nutritional science still debates insulin resistance management strategies like intermittent fasting or timing. Hence, this claim is an opinion rather than a documented guideline reversal. 5. Controversies and criticisms beyond the article. Beyond this particular article, independent reporting and expert opinion reveal several major debates and controversies about the updated guidelines. A. Scientific integrity and industry influence. Critics, including the Physicians' Committee for Responsible Medicine, argue that the new guidelines were authored by individuals with strong ties to the food industry, such as beef, dairy, and cereal companies, raising conflict of interest concerns. This raises questions about whether recommendations reflect robust science or industry interests, particularly given political and economic pressures around food policy. B. Departure from Advisory Committee report. The Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee (DGAC), an independent scientific panel, released a comprehensive evidence review that emphasized plant-forward eating patterns and reduction of chronic disease risk. However, the final guidelines seemingly deviated from some of those recommendations, leading nutrition experts to call the process politicized. This discrepancy has drawn professional criticism that the final guidance lacks consistency with evidence and may confuse consumers. See visual confusion and implementation challenges. Some dietitians have pointed out that pyramid visuals and messaging in the guidelines are confusing or contradictory, making it hard for the public to interpret practical recommendations. Confusion about where various foods fit could undermine the utility of the guidelines in real-world dietary choices. D. Cultural, economic, and practical concerns. Critics also say the guidelines don't adequately consider accessibility, affordability, or cultural eating patterns, potentially making adherence difficult for many Americans. 6. What the guidelines actually say. Summary points from reporting. Although the final official document isn't fully public yet, current reporting outlines key themes in the 2025 to 2030 guidance: emphasis on whole foods and nutrient density over refined and ultra-processed foods, Recognition that protein, including both plant and animal sources, plays a central role in a healthy diet. Shift away from strict low-fat messaging with a more nuanced view of fats, including saturated fats, more explicit attention to added sugar reduction and limits. A broader understanding of healthy dietary patterns that fit diverse lifestyles and needs. 7. Summarizing the debate. Reality versus the article's claim in the articles supported by independent reporting. Guidelines admit they were wrong, no political framing. No official admission. Inverted food pyramid reflects total reversal, partially visual emphasis changes. But not a wholesale reversal. Ultra-processed foods now explicitly targeted, yes, stronger acknowledgement. Protein emphasis dramatically increased, yes, broader emphasis, but context matters. Chronic disease routes like insulin not addressed. Opinion guidelines focused differently. Old carbohydrate, whole grain advice was harmful. Debated. Some science supports refining carbs, not completely rejecting them. 8. Conclusion. What's real and what's opinion? The article, The New Dietary Guidelines, quietly admit they were wrong, reflects a strong opinion about the dietary guidelines rewritten through the lens of a specific nutrition philosophy, low-carb, keto, and anti-processed foods. It frames the new guidelines as a dramatic admission of past mistakes. In reality, the new guidelines do shift emphasis, particularly toward whole foods, protein, and reducing ultra-processed foods, and away from strict low-fat messaging. But that's an evolution in science, not an explicit governmental admission of error. Evidence from mainstream reporting shows both support and controversy around the changes, including concerns about scientific integrity, industry influence, and public clarity. The official guidance process remains complex, politically influenced, and subject to debate among nutrition experts. If you're looking for evidence-based nutritional advice, it's important to consult registered dietitians and credentialed nutrition professionals, peer-reviewed scientific literature. The actual dietary guidelines document, once it is fully released, and treat advocacy articles, including those with strong claims of proof or admissions, with appropriate skepticism. Thank you for watching the Healthy Living RTN. Remember, small daily choices can create powerful, life-changing results. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more health and wellness content. Until next time, stay healthy, stay mindful, and keep living your best life with the Healthy Living RTN.